All right, can everybody see my screen? Good, okay. I also want to introduce my colleague and Mark Lipson, if you're able to come on video for a moment, maybe say something so you pop up to the front. Hey, there you are. I want to introduce my colleague Mark, who will be my support. He's deeply involved with every single thing we're going to be presenting here. And then Mark, maybe also, I might refer a couple things to you, but also help me monitor the chat and if there's any questions, you can just directly answer or alert me to it. Awesome. And yeah, let's get going. First of all, I appreciate informality. I appreciate engagement. We're definitely going to leave some time here at the end for questions, but please feel free to jump in at any point, whether it be raising your hand or something in the chat, and Mark can help me monitor that. Let's go forward. And you can see my screen, right? As I transition. Yep, good. Okay. So today, just talking about kind of what we've developed over the last 4 years or so, 3 to 4 years, to develop an AI enablement hub within Mayo Clinic. So I really want to kind of go over the general organizational structure, our vision, as well as how we think about doing our work. And I'll be really transparent too about sort of what we're learning along the way, what's still a challenge for us, as well as what we have found in terms of lessons learned, and I'll get Mark to help me with that. Then I'll break it down into two of the things that we're doing primarily that may be unique with respect to AI enablement within a healthcare organization. Talk about our consultation and some of the principles behind how we consult across Mayo Clinic, and then get into some of the capabilities. One in particular that we're really excited about that Mark is co-inventor with. So, first of all, our vision. Very simple, but also very difficult to achieve in a lot of ways due to the complexity of the field that we're all in with AI. So our vision is to reduce the time, cost, and effort of translating safe, effective, and ethical AI. We've had this same vision now for years, and it's something that I'm really excited about because it has balance built into our vision. So on one hand, we're trying to make this easier, right? We're trying to reduce time, cost, and effort. We're trying to take something that's very, very complex and turn it into something that is at least more predictable, at least we can at least navigate these processes. And it's what the business is asking of us, right? Is to reduce time and cost, right? How do we make this thing, all of this easier? But it's also balanced with the need to be safe, effective, and ethical. So in some cases, safe, effective, and ethical is defined for us, right? Like, so for going through the FDA, they have a very clear process of this is what we think you need to do for safe, effective, and ethical. And we have a fairly clear roadmap for what we need to do with respect to engaging with the FDA and creating documentation and controls. But in other cases, like for non-regulated products, that can be quite difficult to define, right? It's a lot of alignment with other groups within the organization. It's engagement with industry and with different standards and standard groups and coalitions like the Health AI Partnership. And so that becomes a challenge within itself, is to define safe, effective, and ethical before we start to think about how do we reduce the time, cost, and effort of executing on the processes it takes to be safe, effective, and ethical. And then what hopefully you'll see throughout the materials here as well is we've really tried to hone in our group and focus on translation. We have a ton of discovery efforts across the organization. Some are homegrown, and some are with vendors or procuring certain software or AI tools from vendors. And we try, because of the vast amount of projects that are coming our way, we're really trying to focus on what we think is one of the most difficult pieces of the process, which is translation. And we know through publication and qualitative data that really translation is one of the most difficult parts of this process. 90+% of tools that are built never actually make it to practice due to the complexity of translation. So we're really just taking the challenge and targeting that as our main competence for our AI enablement group here at Mayo Clinic. And this is how we're structured. So this is a significant oversimplification of our organizational chart, but I think it really hits home the main intent of what we're doing within Mayo Clinic. So we're mostly engineers. So we do mostly engineering work within our AI enablement organization. We have AI developers, so data scientists that are actually building models. That's a significant number of folks within our team. And we have AI engineers, which are mostly focused on like software development, software practices, software lifecycle, and systems engineering, architecture, all within the engineering group. And then kind of sandwiched in between is quality and regulation. And I'll get into these in a moment, the translational science and the quality systems. But the way that I like to think about how we're organized, and I'll see if Mark agrees with me, is we the AI development team, the data scientists building the model, they're if we're using an analogy of a car, they're building the engine, right? The engine is going to drive the car. The engine is primary. You can't have it is the AI. The engineering, though, is the car that goes around the engine. You can't have one without the other. If you have just an engine, it's not going to do anything. You need the engineering, you need the body. Likewise, you can't have just a car without the engine. They need to have both, and both need to be high quality. The quality and regulation in between, in my mind, is the processes, the standards, the testing, the way in which we're assembling that whole car together, and doing it in a repeatable and scalable way, doing it in a way that we know what we're getting off of the assembly line. And that's where the importance of these two groups come into play, the translational science and the quality systems. The intersection of AI and quality and regulation is really right now kind of in this translational science space. It's folks that are really knowledgeable about AI systems, how to test those, how to ensure that they're ethical, how to use statistics and other things to make sure that those AI models, the engine is not biased, is transparent, and is doing all the things that are recommended from the field. This is a place of significant growth right now. We're seeing evolution in the translational science from groups like the Health AI Partnership and others, and even from regulatory bodies. This space is advancing really quickly, and we have to keep pace with that. The other intersection is the intersection to the engineering side of things, to the body of the car, and with that, it's I would say more well known. There's a lot more history and precedent, and that really, in our mind, is around the quality systems, right? And a lot of that is influenced by the standards and the regulations that we're able to bring in-house and interpret as best we can for artificial intelligence, and ensure that we have lifecycle management quality systems to the software that will wrap around the model that's being built. That's it. These are not proportional. Our AI development team is large, very large, and our engineering team is even larger, made up of multiple disciplines of engineers, and our quality and regulatory team supports both. They're not necessarily equally proportioned, but all are absolutely necessary to come together. One, I would say, kind of lesson learned for me anyway, is where is healthcare generally at right now? Where are healthcare organizations at? And I think what in my view we're seeing is that healthcare is becoming really sophisticated at AI development. In some cases, it's in-house development. In other cases, it's being very proactive about pulling external solutions into their environment, and being really excited about like generative AI and what AI systems can do to reduce administrative burden and to augment clinical decision making. But I think healthcare is less sophisticated in everything to the right? So I think that a lot of times, especially coming from like research-focused organizations, that healthcare is typically, that's the primary competence, is we'll get that model built, we'll get the engine built, and we'll have evidence or a publication to show, hey, this engine like could really work. It does a lot, but having a little bit of a I would say an underestimate of the processes and the technique that takes to go through the quality and or regulation and engineering processes to actually productize that model, to actually put a car and make it work in a repeatable and scalable way. So that's, again, a lot of our focus is how do we build models for the purpose of teeing it up for these robust processes that we're also defining at the same time. Mark, any additions there? I can also see, I think there's a little delay, and I hope it's not bothering people. Is my connection okay? Oh, you're on mute. I can't hear you. Connecting there. Hey, there.
Your audio is
I can hear you.
Oh, you can? Okay, great. I can see a delay in my image, but as long as my audio is good. Mark, did you want to say something? Or Joe as well? Okay, cool. I'll move on to this one. Okay, so that's our organization and the environment that we're putting ourselves in. Now let's talk a little bit about how we allocate our work. So one thing that we have differentiated ourselves when we think about AI enablement within Mayo Clinic is to make sure that we're not just a sort of a central machine shop, right? Ideas come from all over the organization. They come to us and they say, "Will you build this for us?" Right? To me, that's not enablement. That's just essentially the same as maybe a consultant, right? You could go to any consultant and say, "Hey, I have this idea. Will you build it for me? I'll pay you for it." What we wanted to do is think about how can we evolve the organization to be where we think it needs to be in 3 years, in 5 years, and 10 years. And for us, that meant it's not just building things. It's intentionally focusing on things that we can actually create capabilities internally to scale the things that we do, the things that we build, and the processes that we utilize. So embedded, I'll actually start from the bottom. Embedded support it is one thing that we do, and actually it's a significant portion of what we do, which is we actually take members of our team and put them directly onto prioritized AI projects around the organization. In some cases, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe a little bit more. Folks that will actually put long-term onto that project to help support them. So that's sort of like that we're directly a part of your team model. But in addition, that's not all we do. In addition, we take what we learn through the support of these different groups, and we take the experts that we have on our team, and we make sure that we provide a layer of consultation available to the entire organization. In our mind, that is extremely important to democratize this knowledge of what it takes to translate safely, effectively, and ethically. And in order to democratize that knowledge and share it, we have to have that window. We have to have the ability for teams that have AI ideas, projects that they're working on, and come to us and ask for advice, ask for questions. That consultation is a really important piece of what we do. And also equally important is while we're consulting or while we're providing that direct embedded support onto the teams that have our people embedded into their actual build, is intentionally building capabilities. Now, capabilities could be really small. It could just be, hey, we figured out a really good template for how to gather this knowledge about AI transparency. Or it could be really big, like, hey, we've figured out a whole FDA-aligned quality management system, or anything in between. Hey, we've already developed this software tool to help get your algorithm into the cloud, for example. So while we're consulting and while we're providing that direct support, we're thinking about what can we package? What value are we delivering to these teams? And how can we package it and make it reusable and scalable to others? So this is really our model of how we work. And the goal is to make that all work together, right? So we'll continue to provide consultation, and we'll continue to provide that embedded support. But as we're providing that consultation and as we're providing that embedded support, we're building out a bigger and bigger library of these capabilities. So every time we encounter a unique problem, a scenario, a certain type of model that we're trying to translate into clinical practice, we learn, we package, we put it on our grocery store shelf, is the analogy we use sometimes. And then the next time we're providing a consultation and they're asking the same question, we are, with our enablement group, we, in an ideal state, can say, hey, here's what we have on the shelf. Let's pull it off the shelf and provide that to you and help you utilize it. The next time we're embedding folks from our team onto a project, we can say, hey, we're not just coming with 1 or 2 or 3 FTE, we're coming with the backing of eventually years of experience of solving these problems and everything on the shelf that we're able to bring. And we already have really good evidence. And if you folks on this call are directly involved with examples of what 2 people did for 1 project, now those same 2 people are doing for 12 projects at the same time, right? For 1 specific type of work that we're doing. And that's exactly it. How are we going to be able to scale that for the organization, and how are we going to do it in an organized way? Okay. Pausing for any questions or comments. Okay, great.
Can I just check if my audio is working now?
Yeah, you got it, Mark.
Okay, great.
Thanks. And feel free to chime in, or Joe as well. Joe is another colleague of mine who is, again, everything I say here, Joe definitely played a significant role in. So thanks for joining, Joe. Okay. Breaking that down a little bit. So I think the embedded support is really clear. And I think that that's a model that most people know with respect to enablement is, okay, there's an idea and we're going to apply resources to help build that idea. That I don't want to underestimate. That is a significant portion of what we do. I think a little more unique is how do we apply consultation? What are some of the themes in how we apply consultation? And then what are some of the themes in our capabilities? So digging into consultation a little bit here. One major theme of ours, and I think that this is a huge lesson learned and really important if anybody here is considering building out an enablement model, is you can't do everything for everyone in AI. If you can, you've got either unlimited resources or every domain that's necessary, every subject matter expert that's necessary to be part of it has somehow rolled up into your organization, which is, in my view, probably pretty unlikely. But we really think we really take an organizational approach where we say, well, we can't do everything for everybody, but we can understand all the different players within the organization and help align those players, help align and navigate amongst those players. This is just kind of an illustration that we've used as an example for how we go about doing that. First and foremost, really important from our enablement perspective, when we're thinking about, okay, we've got grassroots innovation all over the place, and we're trying to help each of them, teach them to fish, right? Teach them the processes and the procedures and the documentation and the technical skills needed to translate their model. We really try to ensure that there is a core team responsible for receiving the value of those models that are being built. And I'll try to say that in another way. Ideas that come to us, if we were to just build and then say, okay, here you go, we may not be meeting the needs of why that idea was given to us in the first place. However, what we found is in other scenarios where we have a core team, typically it involves a physician and an innovator aligned to that physician, saying, here's the problem that we're trying to solve, and here's what resources we want to apply to that problem, and be a part of the process, that core team being part of the process and saying, yes, this works. No, that doesn't work, especially when we're talking about unique clinical settings. And then once that model is built and it's applied towards that, to that clinical setting, for the team to be able to provide feedback and say, yeah, it is providing the value we intended to provide, or no, it's not, right? And having that core team have their foot on the throttle of whether that value is actually being seen through or not, it's a much better scenario than just having somebody else build it for you. So we really expect to have the domains or the different groups that we're serving have a core team, a clinical champion associated with that project that we can serve in this process. That core team likely has, and this is just an example illustration, likely has a team built around it. Maybe it's some contractors, maybe it's some folks that they're borrowing from another part of the organization, maybe it's folks within their own department. And then these other lines are trying to illustrate, maybe IT environment support is not needed entirely or significantly early on, but as that project ramps up, IT becomes more and more important. And then once it's deployed, IT might be the primary support model for that particular model. This is just an example. Maybe data collection, data needs, it starts out heavy early on, but once that data is collected, the effort, the time and the effort it takes to enable the right data strategy for that particular product might go down. Of course, it still maintains. And then maybe there's other groups that are getting involved at different points. The way I like to think about this is that each project that we serve has its own footprint. Every project will probably have different lines, different ways in which they're engaging across groups across the organization, of which we're one of them. So early on, I think we really try to think about what should this team need over the course of the project based on what they're trying to get accomplished, based on the risks of that project and so forth, and how do we piece together the right team from by utilizing what resources we have within the organization. So enterprise alignment, huge theme of our enablement, not trying to do everything for everyone, but to align the different groups that are already existing. Same theme in terms of alignment goes to risk. How do we manage the risk of AI systems? One approach could be, oh, AI is new, AI is different. Let's just put a whole AI risk program in place. We did not take that approach, and I don't think that would have been as effective an approach of what we did do, which is we recognized that there are many, and I think most healthcare has many domains that are directly tied to managing risks: data governance, privacy, security, third-party solutions coming in, vetting those third-party solutions, and so forth. But one thing that we're thinking a lot about is, rather than create a whole new risk program only for AI and trying to bring all of those domains into a different area, how do we augment the existing domains, right? Privacy and security are extremely robust. They may not be fully up to speed with everything they need for AI, but let's empower them with that, right? So that's the kind of our enablement mindset to appropriately assess and mitigate risks of AI rather than reinventing the wheel. All of these, I would say, except for one, are pretty much inherent to most healthcare organizations, in my opinion. The one that I think is new-ish is this one: translation and AI risk management. I would say one thing that we kind of identified early on when we were thinking about all the risks, potential risks of AI, and what our healthcare organization infrastructure already has, and then maybe where we want to focus on filling in some gaps, is this. So this is a relatively newer one, thinking about translation. And with this, we're primarily thinking about risks associated with developing and deploying products. And I think this is really interesting because healthcare organizations aren't really used to building products. Healthcare organizations are really good at research, and a lot of that research ends up going to industry, and then industry kind of builds products around it, takes it through the regulators if necessary, and so forth. But with AI, we're kind of in a different space where we're not talking about drugs, with significant investment into facilities or hardware, where we're talking about significant investment into manufacturing of those hardware systems that typically we rely on industry. The software, we can do it ourselves. And I think that is what we're seeing in the field. That's probably why we're all here today to learn more about, okay, how do we, as a healthcare organization, invest in productization of AI? Because we can do it. We don't always have to rely on partners or industry to do everything for us. We still may utilize them heavily in certain places and areas where it makes sense from a business perspective, but we may do a lot ourselves as well. But what this bucket really represents, and probably the rest of the talk in some way or another is going to be mostly about this bucket, is how do we think about AI within a healthcare organization from a product perspective? How do we get the right controls in place? How do we identify the risks? How do we work those two things together? How do we identify the risks in order to put the right controls in place? That's really where a lot of our AI enablement team is focusing, in addition to saying, okay, but that's not everything. We still need to be able to navigate amongst the other risk domains and ensure that those perspectives are incorporated into the overall. So narrow to that one domain: translation, productization. this is a really high level overview of kind of the way in which we're conducting that risk domain, which I would say is like the additional risk domain in addition to all the other ones. So I don't want to neglect any of the other ones. It looks really straightforward. It's complex as the field is still growing. But what we really try to do is have, again, back to consultation, a really easy way to interact with experts in order to provide that consultation, where we'll have an introductory meeting with experts across translational science, regulatory science, engineering, and others as needed. Do a preliminary evaluation where we consider the risk of that AI system. Maybe it's very low risk. Maybe it's just kind of augmenting some of the administrative support functions. Still has risk, but relatively low. Versus maybe it's a higher risk function that's driving or influencing clinical decision making. That bucketing will help define what sort of processes and recommendations would we have for that team. And in order to develop that, we bring together multiple experts through a council that we have together to prepare. We think about this in terms of identifying risks and preparing a report or preparing information to share back with the team to say, here are the risks that we've identified. Of those, here are the risks that we believe are unacceptable, and therefore here are the recommendations we have to mitigate those risks to an appropriate level. That's kind of the basic process of what we do from a consultative perspective. After consultation, we go into something that looks a little bit more like governance, where in some cases, the risks are high enough where we actually have an independent review of the risk-benefit profile that has been created for that product. We call this a review board. We also have called it an SAMD review board at one point, because typically the things that get there are closer to medical device functionality because it carries higher risks. But this acts really as an independent review over the risk assessment, making sure that it's not just the team themselves or the team with advisors that are identifying those risks. Rather, it's a little bit more of an independent organizational focus. On this board are physicians, legal experts, compliance experts, research experts, and so forth. And all of that work is to create that ultimate diligence that would go to endorsement from a governance function. Typically, the governance functions here at Mayo Clinic are gates in order to determine what should be allowed to go into clinical practice. At the end of the day, our AI enablement team, either ourselves or through trying to navigate all of the other domains, risk domains within the organization, help create that report to get to the governance function. So that's actually prepared. And it doesn't try to get to the governance function and have the governance function say, I'm a little worried here, but I don't know what to worry about, or I don't know how you can articulate to me that you're going to be safe and effective, and how are you going to protect patients. We really help create those reports so that it's prepared for the governance sign-off. Digging into this one more, this review board concepts, we can certainly share a little more information, but this review board, one of the primary reasons that was stood up is to make regulatory determinations. It's a tough area that shouldn't necessarily be expected for everybody to be able to do on their own. So this board, one of the primary reasons, or one of the primary pieces of work, is to determine is this software or AI functionality a medical device or not. If it is, it would be advised, okay, here are the steps that would be recommended. If it's not a medical device, here are likely less burdensome steps that would be recommended. But oftentimes we find ourselves, especially with clinical decision support software, we find ourselves kind of in a middle area, which is one of the primary reasons why we need this independent review, to be able to make determinations and set that precedent. It's a very collaborative board. It operates a lot like an institutional review board, where maybe there's actually just some recommendations to make changes to lower the risk, right? Oh, if you maybe don't do this thing as a part of your solution, if it's not tied to the value that solution is doing, you actually might lower the risk and not be a medical device. One primary example of that might be, image analysis. For clinical decision support applications, if you're doing image analysis, you're automatically not exempt. You're automatically, not completing the clinical decision support criteria to be a non-medical device. But if image analysis isn't a core component of your project, maybe that you could forego the need to use that image analysis, and maybe you could be a non-medical device and therefore have a different or burden for the process. So it would be a back and forth to make those recommendations. This board is also able to assess and review the risks that have been identified in the control measures that are put in place, again, with an independent mind, and then make those recommendations for, okay, here's the types of risk control measures that we would recommend are in place. So really, really important to have that independent oversight. And one I'll call last thing with respect to consultation, again, because we're trying to think about things a little bit more from an enterprise perspective and not just one of the I'll call it siloed, but necessary functions that are necessary for building AI solutions and tools. But because we're thinking a little bit more broadly, we're also trying to think, how do we make sure that any work that's asked of the team that we're trying to enable for building these tools and deploying these tools, how do we make it so that any work that's put into these tools is beneficial for the long run, right? How do we make it so we don't say, okay, go down this path and research it, get all this information. Once you have that, start over and start building it again from a product perspective, right? We want to make sure that rather it's more like this diagram, which is more like Lego stacking, where if you're going to put some investment and time into here, have that be a foundation for what the next step is, and then what the next step is, and then what the next step is. If we're harmonized, and I feel like this is one of the tasks of our AI enablement team, is to harmonize ourselves enough to where we leverage work that's already been done as best as we possibly can, so that over the course of research and discovery, all that we're doing in terms of like identifying what is this model, what's it going to do for us, is foundational to when we get into translation, and we're adding additional controls, adding quality systems thinking to it. And then, of course, once we go into full deployment, investigation or deployment, we're adding additional controls and requirements to make sure that it's fully controlled. And Mark, feel free to jump in this, because you've done a ton in this space. This is research, our human subjects protection, human subjects research protection program, and this is IRB. But it's actually, and Mark, I really like the way you think about this, it's actually a little bit above IRB. IRB is one of the controls to make sure we're protecting human subjects, but so is executing our studies according to good clinical practice, finding clinical association. As we go through that process in the early stages of discovery for these models, let's leverage what we find and what we do, and also start to build on, and this is GMLP, we made this a little while ago, good machine learning practices, but I would say AI best practices generally, now that not everything is machine learning. How do we start to incorporate those practices of making sure that we have ethical and non-biased systems as part of our human subjects protection? That will be core to once we get into good manufacturing practices, right? Software development, the car around the engine, right? This is the engine, starting to build up the high quality engine. Now we're building the car around the engine when we start to try to translate that model, but we can leverage everything we learned about the engine when we're starting to build the car around it in our good manufacturing practices and the software that we wrap around and influence. And not to underestimate, seat belts, brakes. Brakes are a super important piece of how an AI system is delivered, and that would be accounted for at this stage. And then, of course, we start to think about our quality management system, QMS, our quality system thinking, life cycle management for those models, prepare for once we get into deployment, the quality system thinking gets even more robust, as well as the continuation of all the other things that we've done. Mark, do you want to add anything to this, given your significant involvement in all of this?
Yeah, I'll just keep it kind of simple. When you're under research, the Human Research Protection Program, that's really that's your foundation. That's your safety line, because that includes, and it's going to depend on your institution. Everybody has a different research protection program, but that's going to include things like legal. It's going to include things like IRB, includes things like good clinical practice. This is the safety net to make sure that you can do your research in a safe environment where you're not going to be harming the subjects that are part of that research. That stays throughout this entire life cycle that's shown here, where those other color blocks are really about how do you design the system not necessarily the environment, which is controlled by the HRPP, but the system itself to be self-reliant, self-sufficient to account for the risks of any misuse or anything that might happen while building that system. And so eventually the goal, if you were to go to the FDA after your clinical investigation, for example, the HRPP wouldn't be there. The whole point is to make this product be self-sufficient based off of good machine learning practice, good manufacturing practice, and all of those elements that go into a quality management system. So what we're showing here is really the institutional safety net that's provided to make sure that translation can be effective.
Yeah, absolutely. And then to add on to that, we may re-engage human subjects protection on significant changes, right? Or if we identify risks that were previously unknown, we may say, oh, we need to go back and study this. But it's seamless, right? We can, especially within a healthcare organization, this is such a huge opportunity. We have everything in-house, right? We have the ability to go back and research and study and revalidate and look at new features or look at new intended uses for those products that we built in a research setting. So if we allow these things to be seamless back and forth, we actually encourage research. We encourage human subjects protection rather than making that feel like a burden. So another significant reason why these are stacked together as opposed to thought about in terms of different silos or different scope. Okay, so we talked about, again, the three things for enablement, right? Embedded support. We're giving you people to directly apply these things to your team. Consultation, and a lot of what we just talked about here with consultation. And then the last one here is our capabilities. How do we take the value we provide, package it, and make it so it's reusable and scalable? How do we make sure that our state, what we look like in 3 years, 5 years, is significantly better than where we are today? So we kind of use an analogy when we think about our capabilities, and we think about it in terms of creating a recipe. In this case, a recipe for safe, effective, and ethical AI. So one of the analogies we give is sort of like the Betty Crocker cake box mix. And on that mix, we may have a link to support, right? Maybe a YouTube video in this analogy of how should you go about making that cake. So the support activities. In our context for AI enablement, our support is the people or the training materials or the guides or the templates that we have, all of which we call capabilities, right? Things that are going to make it easier the next time we do that thing. A Betty Crocker cake mix. The other thing we have is artifacts. On the Betty Crocker box, it would be like the instructions, right? The place that you can go and look and be like, okay, now I know how to do it. Without that, even with Betty Crocker, I would be completely lost. But our artifacts are really like documentation. Again, what are the processes? Going back to that, how do we prepare for the governance sign-off? What are those documents that are showing diligence? What are those documents that show that we have identified and mitigated the risks appropriately? Those become artifacts. Those become capabilities for us. And then we have our assets. In the Betty Crocker analogy, it's actually the cake mix, the actual mix that you've bought that is getting you further on your way to making the cake than if you were to start from scratch. And for us, it would be the code-based assets. Have we built pipelines? Have we built display, functionality? Have we built other existing software tools that we can reuse, repackage, and reuse for the next team that is probably going to ask for the exact same thing on the right way? We can just reapply it rather than rebuild it. So all of these come together into something that we're really excited about, and part of the reason I brought Mark here, being co-inventor, is actually a tool that we've developed internally to try to think about, okay, as we get all these things in place, are there ways in which we can deliver them more seamlessly, right? Documentation. If you've ever done processes and documentation in SharePoint alone, it is messy. It gets out of sync super quick, and it's difficult to navigate. And especially from an enablement perspective, it just doesn't resonate when you're trying to bring teams into reusing and updating processes, procedures, and documentation within within SharePoint, for example, or support. Like if you're always providing this level of support at this stage, are there ways in which we can just make that easier, or ways we can make that more clear and transparent? So we've developed this super great tool called the Translational Expert, all built here, and in short, it's T-Rex, so like the dinosaur. And the goal of this tool is not necessarily to drive the process, but to reflect the processes that work. So as we've identified, for example, what are the types of documentation and processes we would need to do to submit to the FDA? Well, that's well known. This tool helps do that at scale, right? It helps create reusability and repeatability to that process. I'm so sorry for the analogy, Mark, but I have to do it. It's kind of like the TurboTax for AI translation, right? How do we simplify and make it easier to understand the processes and the procedures and the things that you need to put together? And where we started actually was more the regulatory and international standard ISO based processes because of how well known they are. That's where we really started. And I'll fly through some of the key aspects of T-Rex, but then Mark, I'd love to turn it to you to clean it up and or correct me for anything that I may have misrepresented. Mark is the lead of the project, so I'm speaking on his behalf.
That was great. I mean, this is really to address the fundamental challenges we're seeing trying to bring industry practices into a healthcare organization. So that is, we know that standard off-the-shelf types of software just won't cut it because our incentives are just different. We have a patient-oriented incentive, and that overlaps very little with some of the incentives out in industry. So for us, having this tool is really going to hopefully help us expedite, scale, and enable the translation of technologies.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up, because I think it's actually really important context to bring up even before we go into some of like the key features is the different incentives within a healthcare organization, right? We really wanted to make this tool the ability to convert work that's already been done into the best practices, right? To guide transformation of a healthcare organization, as opposed to making it a platform that everybody has to go to and use, right? Different, I think, when you're talking about this sort of homegrown solution that's trying to enable healthcare organizations to transform up to an organization can build high quality, safe, effective, and ethical product. And there's many other themes, but hopefully those will come out as we kind of go through some of these key features here. One key feature of this tool is model cards, right? Model cards, feature cards, really the ability to develop in a standardized way and communicate transparency from a translational science or from a data science perspective, right? Are these the model cards illustrating safety and effectiveness of the engine of the model? So tracking models and the risks. And again, this is a point in time, but also now in a tool that's displayed with product documentation, it becomes a lifecycle management, right? So anytime that model is retrained, we would update and be able to communicate that model card. Another key thing we found, and sorry, I had to blur it out because I realized there's actually a lot in there that we shouldn't have shown publicly, is portfolio visibility, right? The more systems and tools that we're able to enable in our system, the more we have an inventory of models across the organization, and the more we can think about how to share resources and documentation and processes and artifacts and software assets with each other, right? Like the connector piece, huge for enablement, right? So that we're not even just by lack of knowledge neglecting to reuse something that would have been really valuable, right? We can see it, it's there. So that portfolio visibility is huge. Simplifying documentation, and for anybody who's familiar with the FDA processes, we or the ISO International Standards Organization 6304, 14971, this is very tied to that. But how do we make it easier, right? How do we make it, again, so we're not in SharePoint creating these documents, losing versions, creating automated, not having the ability to create automated traceability, which I think is in one of our other slides. This significantly simplifies the process by having it all here. The ability to go in and put information, have it automatically convert into the larger documents, the larger PDFs that would be representative of following the best practices that would be identified in regulation standards.
David, can I make one comment for
Yeah,
that?
please go for it.
I will mention that you said FDA and standards and processes. So what I want to say is FDA is rooted in those same industry practices as everyone. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's only for medical devices or regulated. In fact, a lot of the things you see, requirements, risks, testing, these are all basic components of just following good software engineering practice. And so this is a really great framework with which to be able to look at the design history of any type of software product or product, really, more generally speaking, because it gives you insight into not just what products you have, like the product portfolio that you shared in the last slide, but it gives you insight into things that get impacted when something changes. And that'll come up in the traceability slide. But just wanted to point out that these things that are being highlighted here are not specific for software as a medical device or Mayo Clinic or whatever. This is very generic and applied to almost any software resource.
Yeah. And I'll maybe I'll have to continue with traceability from my perspective on traceability, the lawyer perspective. This is so prone to human error, done manually, right? Traceability, massive Excel files showing that we've tied risks to requirements to mitigations. It one mistake and it ripple effects throughout everything. Automating that is a significant time and cost savings. And again, making it a higher quality traceability allows for more assurance that it's safe, effective, and ethical. Mark, do you want to speak to traceability and maybe actually also like how you can judge impact of changes and other things that come through?
Yeah, and I'll do that through some use cases really quickly. So the more obvious piece here is that you can get to some traceability within a product itself. So let's say a test fails, you can work backwards and see which requirements are impacted as a result of that. So you know where to make your change. And when you make your change, you know what gets impacted by simply moving up and down. But there's a sort of a hidden improvement that happens in traceability. If we talk about third-party integrations, if you're working with ADO or like any other repository or anything else, when things change, you can signal both up and down what might happen. So if someone's in ADO, makes a code change, imagine if that somehow propagates back to the requirements so that those who are looking at it, they're able to identify through traceability what needs to be changed, what needs to be modified, so that A, you don't miss it, and B, you don't need 30 meetings to try to solve an issue that somebody made when they made a code commit.
Awesome. Great point. Let me go through the last one or two things really quick. Again, having a repository like this also allows for better collaboration, and there's features that Mark and team have built out to encourage collaboration while designing and building this project. And then, of course, there's the reusability. I think we already kind of spoke to that. Whereas if we do something once, it's so much easier to take that same process, documentation or risk control measure, and apply it to a different project. Quick step back before I have my concluding slide, and then make sure we get to questions. Going back to the very first circle, right? We have AI development, AI quality and regulation, AI engineering. My comment about, AI development is becoming more and more sophisticated, but we've got to still think about how does the engineering and how does the quality and regulation, like the body of the car and the processes done to build that car, how do we bring it all together? It's all kind of here, right? We have the model card, which is the illustration of the development practices for AI being followed. And then we have the software engineering and the sequence of the software engineering to show that we're doing it in a compliant way, and we're doing it in a way that is fulfilling the engineering needs. So really excited about how we bring that together, try to make it more seamless and simple, so that we can help transform to a more high quality culture of AI development. So finishing off my last slide here, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions. Just themes that hopefully came up, and if they didn't, we'll have them here throughout the presentation. One is, and this is Mayo Clinic, and we'll always put this first and foremost, we prioritize the needs of our patients, right? Even just putting time and effort to AI enablement in our mind is prioritizing the needs of the patient, right? The fact that we have a group dedicated to ensuring that AI systems deployed are safe, effective, and ethical, and we're doing our diligence to do that, prioritizing the needs of a patient. But more specific to the AI enablement team or the value that we're providing, again, we're really more of a hub and spoke. We're the hub trying to create central capabilities, but not for the purpose of being the funnel that everybody goes through, rather for the purpose of making sure that we're enabling teaching to fish different groups, departments, or even individual teams around the organization to leverage that hub as best as they can, and to understand what it takes to go through the translation process and democratize that knowledge. Enterprise alignment, again, I think I spoke about that a good amount. How do we augment the existing domains rather than feeling like we need to rebuild everything? There's a lot of value in what healthcare organizations already have. We don't need to start over. A risk-based approach. Again, this is a lot more appetizing to think about things in terms of, okay, let's start with what are the risks, what are unacceptable, and what do we need to do to mitigate those risks. That approach is really great for enablement because it ties work that may be previously unknown to the innovators to why they're doing that. As opposed to, it's a lot harder to think about things in terms of like standards and regulations, checklist styles, like, well, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. But if it's untied from why you're doing it, that becomes really challenging, difficult, and even, or even worse, like people wanting to give up. Kind of to risk, I think, really helps create context. Reusability and scalability. Again, everything we do, we try to think about, is this something that others will benefit down the road? And if so, how do we package it so that it can be leveraged? And then finally, sharing and learning, democratizing this knowledge certainly goes internally. It's part of the reason we have consultative services, but also goes externally. It's why we're here. It's why we're part of the Health AI Partnership. It's part of why we're part of different coalitions. Is how do we take what we've been very fortunate to have, which is infrastructure and resources to build out these types of things, and how do we share that, and how do we learn from others that are trying to do similar things to improve ourselves, and vice versa. How do we continue to make healthcare organizations as a whole better off by what we're learning? So I will end with that and take off my screen. I have not checked the chat, Mark. I'm not sure if you saw anything in the chat or opened it up for questions. Sorry, there's only 4 more minutes left, but happy to take any questions to the chat as well.
Yeah, nothing in the chat, but feel free to ask them out loud or in the chat. Melissa, did you have a question? I saw you come up. Yeah.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Couldn't figure out how to raise my hand online. Thank you so much. This was a really informative and really thoughtful look at your process of keeping your entire process kind of efficient and viable. I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to if you collaborate outside at all, or if you really have created kind of an internal ecosystem that's really just meant to work inside the Mayo system, or is there an effort to bring in outside thought at some point in your process?
Absolutely prioritizing external engagement and thought. Like, part of the reason we're involved, we're part of the leadership team of the Health AI Partnership, but we have folks involved with the Coalition for Health AI and other groups. Try to get that cross track, that cross engagement, and even actually have some of our employees dedicated entirely to bridging what we do internally to the rest of the organization, and potentially maybe some of this, like the tools, the processes that we have, could even make those available. We're not quite there yet, and I think part of it is how do we make it work really well internally to know that we're ready to go external. It takes a lot to get us to that point, but absolutely, it's in our vision.
David,
just to follow up on that, is there a way that companies outside, like my own, could connect with you on that?
Yeah, we've engaged plenty of times. We have another, well, we could talk about this offline, but there's also the Mayo Clinic platform, which really is the more external facing group, where primarily our task within our AI enablement team is primarily focused internal, but certainly we have ways in which we engage maybe even through the Mayo Clinic platform, that we engage with industry and seek ways in which there's potential partnerships. Yeah, great question. Oh, but reach out to us directly, and we'll link you to those people rather than making you go find who they are. That would be totally fine.
David, we have a few questions in the chat.
All right.
So do you want me to read them to you? I can start with
Yeah, read or answer if you already have one.
well, it's a three-part question. So do all models get productized, or is there a gating mechanism for engineering to dig in? Do you want to take that one and I'll take the second one?
Sure. The simple answer is we have to have a gating mechanism. And I think the gating mechanism acts a little bit naturally when we do that the risk-driven approach, right? If we identify risks and the rigor required to mitigate those risks is too much, it becomes a natural gating mechanism. There's also kind of a natural gating mechanism of just capacity of ability of people to dedicate resources, and or if we identify anything in a model that it just shouldn't go to clinical practice, those would all be gating. But at the same time, actually, a lot of what we try to do is give deference to the physicians that with regard to clinical value. If they're putting their time into it, it's likely there's clinical value. So we also try to promote that innovation as well. Yeah, Mark, go ahead on the next one.
Yeah, the second question is, how do you think of productization and support for AI products outside the Mayo walls? I think this is a really great question. As any healthcare institution, we make a lot of partnerships with outside vendors to bring in models. And so we help support them in a variety of ways. One, we try to make sure that whatever we bring in will be successful, so we test it. But two, we also work with those vendors. We have a strong relationship with them to help customize and build to our needs. Although we don't have the same level of insight and input that one would have if you were building it internally, we do try to maximize the benefit, not just for Mayo, but for anyone that might be using those products by making sure we're providing the best clinical practice back, that we're doing what we can to help. And oftentimes we also have partnerships with various companies to help do things like collect data, work under an IRB to help them drive some of the AI solutions forward. So it's not, we don't have any Mayo solutions outside of our own walls. For that, typically there's third parties that will do that, or spin up a company to do that or something else. But Mayo itself has not delivered any AI products that are outside of our walls. I'm going to pass the third one to you. I know we're running out of time, so this might be
final answer.
But where's the greatest opportunity you see to execute on your vision of reducing time, effort, and cost?
Yeah, I think that if we were able to take capabilities and then eventually have those potentially shared beyond, we empower healthcare organizations to take AI into their own hands. That's really it. If you look at it at the end of the day, we have clinical expertise, technical expertise, we have the data, we have the clinical workflows, we have a mission, we have ethics and a mission to serve our patients. And if we have control over the development of these AI products, that's a space that I want to be a patient in. And so that's really, I think, where we see the greatest opportunity is transforming healthcare organizations to also be product organizations with respect to AI. I think that brings us right to time. So thank you.
It does. Thank you so much, David and Mark, and the Mayo team. And thanks everyone for joining. We will have details for December's Healthcare Hub on our website. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thanks all.
Bye, everybody. See you later.